Thank you everyone for being here. So I wanted to talk about the problem of counterfeit products and what we're doing and why we're using blockchain technology to try to fix it. So I'll talk about the implementation of what we're doing, why, what, and who. So let me go first of all to why. 1 million lives can be saved if we apply blockchain to this problem. And they're really bad crimes. Terrible things happen, and brands get very badly damaged. The returns on $1,000 spent on heroin could be $20,000 if you're importing heroin. Cigarettes, you can see the figure, 43,000, but if you do pharmaceuticals, it's a massive return on your expense. Fake pharmaceuticals kill 1 million people a year. That's an Interpol figure, 1 million people a year. But it's not just that's a statistic I just gave you, but it's 1 million lives. Think of it, that's 1 million kids that lose their parents. Their parents went out and bought anti-malarial tablets that had no active ingredients, or it's kids that parents that lose a child. They've gone out and spent, they don't make a lot of money, they've gone out and spent it, and they've been cheated. It's so bad that the World Customs Organization now believes that we have more fake pharmaceuticals for sale in the world than we do genuine ones. Here's some examples from Australia. Sorry, this is a local. I just was presenting it in Melbourne last week. It was at a hospital, the Sydney Children's Hospital, and the pharmacist was grinding up of all things, Valium. Apparently Valium is very helpful for children when they're seriously ill. It manages their blood pressure. Pharmacist was grinding up the tablets and thought, that looks unusual. Tested it, no active ingredients. The problem worldwide of Viagra is it's to the point that it's a major cause of death in countries like the Philippines. There's now a social movement to try to limit the number of people that are dying. Men are known to have taken it and dropped dead beside the bed, or have a stroke or a heart attack afterwards. It can be filled with printer ink to get the color, rat poison sometimes. It's not just that it may have no active ingredients, it may have toxic ingredients. In Australia, there's a nationwide recall of Valium just recently. It could also be food. The UK government thinks that up to 10% of food that goes into the country may be fake. Olive oil from Spain, it's neither olive oil, nor is it from Spain. In Shanghai, they think up to 80% of the alcohol that's for sale may be fake. But this one's the one that really gets me though. A Mexican governor was involved in a scheme to fake chemotherapy for children. They think up to 700 children may have died because instead of being given chemotherapy, they were given saline solution just to make money. That's how bad this really is. So that's the whys. And as you can see, there's a really big problem out there and it needs to be fixed. So what are we doing about it? Well, we're building a blockchain solution, but there's some really big issues here. When you say, it's an easy thing to say, a blockchain solution, but what are we doing with that? Because you get two competing demands in relation to transparency. Everyone loves transparency about other people's information, and they want confidentiality of their own. So somewhere you've got to find that arrangement where certain things can be kept private and other things can be made public. There's also the whole issue of flawed logic, and I'll talk more about that in a second, and making full use of the technology. He talked about the issue of transparency and confidentiality and how those two things really must be balanced. The other thing is that when you talk about blockchain, it really did start with Bitcoin, and Bitcoin, we know, has not been cracked. So everything we do that's apart from that, we are weakening that trusted standard, the proven standard of reliability. So if we start to do a private chain, then we're starting to do some far less reliable uses of that technology. And this is why I really think it's a time for everyone that's involved in these technologies that are not using Bitcoin chains to stop and think about what they're doing. Some of you may have heard of the cane toad before. It's this great curse in Australia. It's a completely toxic introduced species. If your dog goes over and finds it in the garden and sniffs it or licks it, your dog dies. Snake, any native animal that eats it dies. It's spread, it's 1980, it's doubled that now. The tragedy of it is, it was brought into the country because there was a problem with a beetle in the sugar cane. And in the lab, you put the beetle and you put a cane toad in there, and next thing, the cane toad has just had lunch. In the real world, the beetle lives at the top of the sugar cane and the cane toad lives on the ground. They never met. And so it didn't achieve the job that it was introduced for, and it's a complete plague on the entire continent. The Tao. I love this line. We're going to build something that's self-governing and that isn't influenced by outside forces. 3 weeks after they raised their money, 30% of it had been stolen. $50 million was influenced by outside forces. There's also the choice. Remember when the internet came out, it was released often by young males who rushed into it, very quick to get to market, wanted to be the first to get there. But look at the things that it released on us. We all use it for our hotel bookings and our airlines, and it's brought a lot of good stuff, but it's also brought a lot of bad things to us. My question to you is, if they'd spent another couple of weeks thinking about privacy or protection or about the social impact or the ethics of what they were doing, would they have done it differently? Could we have done it better? I think that's what we need to bring into the whole question of what we're building and what we're putting on blockchains, that social responsibility. We get things like Airbnb. It's great, it does a lot of good things, but it also has a downside to it. It's causing huge problems in a lot of cities around the world, as you know, where the local people can't afford to live close to the city anymore because the tourists want to live there. It was so bad in Barcelona, unfortunately, just a week before they had that terrible incident with the car killing all those people. I read an article in The Guardian that said that the locals were so upset about tourists because of the Airbnb effect, they were actually stopping the tourist buses and banging on the windows and telling people not to come to their city. There was, after the tragedy, an unfortunate bit of graffiti on a wall there written in English so the tourists could understand, and that was, why do they call it tourist season if we're not allowed to shoot them? You get the taxi protests now of Uber. Again, I love the service, but what has it done to businesses that had spent decades building up their business in the taxi industry and the disruption? So there's good and bad. Question for what I'm talking about, and I'm talking about data and massive amounts of data. We've got this problem of data ownership. We've got this dictatorship. Well, I don't know if it's more than that. We've got Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple, and they own more information about you than your own nation does. If you upload a photo of yourself onto Facebook, it's no longer your property. That's a photo of you owned by Facebook. is that really the way that we want to build this technology into the future? Or is this a chance, now that we're building blockchains, and is this a chance to do it better? Stop and think and say, no, we don't want that anymore. There's got to be a better way to organize our data ownership. So we can either build it as a big link that's very vulnerable, or we can build it where we integrate with all sorts of other businesses, we share the data, and we build a more robust architecture and structure. So what our company is doing, and I will get to what we're doing, is we want to build a system that truly lives up to the full potential of blockchain. We don't want to own the data ourselves. We want to use some of it for our own commercial purposes, but we want to make sure that we can't even get to that data ourselves. So if we're going to have these private chains, are we just replicating a new Facebook, or are we going to build it so the data is not able to be touched, not able to be owned or manipulated in the way that it is under the internet structures? Not only that, there's a national security. If you're starting to talk about trade, do you really want certain other governments to know your trade figures? Then they can bargain against you. Do you want your competitors to know? So when you say you're going to put everything on a chain and it's going to be public, you've really got to think through these things. It's not as simple as it sounds. Not only should it be isolated, so even my tech team can't get in there and touch anything or access it except under the rules that we've already disclosed. You can see my lawyer side coming out here in regulation. But I also want an auditing system that fully monitors our compliance, and at any time, 24/7, anyone in the world can look at it and say whether we're abiding by our data access rules or in the distribution or not. So I believe that's the gold standard. If we're going to have private chains, this is what they should be. It shouldn't be a private chain that owns the public's data. So I'll jump through this pretty quickly. I usually have this for less sophisticated audiences. I think most people here understand have a very good understanding about blockchain and the technology. So we talk about 3 layers of protection in our solution. First of all, we have cryptographic certainty, logistics tracking, and then of course why we use blockchain technology. So the first layer is of course the tokens that the banks put out compared to the standard of encryption that's built into blockchain technology. 2 to the power of 67. It's a huge number. I just like this because I can't understand numbers very well. But Princeton University said it's as though if every person on the planet was in turn a planet of 7 billion people. So it's just a massive number, very hard to crack. So our solution is we put an identifier on every single item, every packet, every can, every bottle of wine. Then the second layer is we track that all the way through the supply chain, from the baton changes through the 20 or 30 people that handle a particular shipment, making sure that it doesn't get lost or dropped or go down a side street for an hour and come out with a completely different shipment on board, because that's what is happening now to a vast amount of the world's trade. Everyone, I think, is familiar with immutability, auditability, and the distributed ledger. I usually talk to people who are not familiar with it. I'll skip through those. But here's the third layer, why we use blockchain technology, and that is the double spend feature. So we have a free app. A consumer can pick up the item in store, scan it with the app, and check. First of all, is it a genuine code on that item? First layer. Second layer of security, does all the logistics tracking make sense? If the rest of the product is being sold, the rest of that container is being sold in a different city, we've probably got a problem, or even in a different suburb, or even the times just don't make sense. Then the third thing is, has that ID ever been sold before? Now, why that's important in this context is the whole counterfeiter's model is to make 10,000 copies of something, but if they can still make their copies, which they are, but if they can only sell one, then you destroy their business model. That's the secret of what we're doing. I'll jump through this very quickly. Who we are. So we've already done a successful trial of a shipment of wine from Australia to China. We went all the way through the transportation, the ports, the shipping company, the trucking company. We've built an alliance with DP World, the world's largest ports company. They have 78 container terminals around the world. We went in at the CEO level. He was the first person we pitched the idea to, and he's been our strongest supporter in the business. DB Schenker was also involved. We're also at the CEO level there and worked very closely with them. Hamburg Sud was involved in the trial as well. And there's a port software company in Australia. We've been working very closely with them and with DB Schenker, integrating with their IT systems. That gives us automated data feeds from 17 shipping lines, 13 container terminals. You can read all the stats there. So we're really building a deep, rich data flow here. And our name is, because of the 3 layers of protection, is we're all about to be sure, to be sure, to be sure. TBS times 3. Thank you very much for your time.